Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I'm going to be looking at three potential new swing states for 2028. These are states that we did not deem as toss-ups or swings. They were consensus, either the liberal states or conservative states. And in 2028, that may or may not change depending on the polling that we get and the shifts in demographics that we get, things of that nature. But I'm going to be going through three different states that could become newer swing states here for the 2028 cycle. And we're very early. We're still over a year away before the midterms. I think there is a high percent chance, just before I even really get into this video, that the seven swing states will likely stay the seven swing states, the seven swing states that we had for 2024. I don't see a huge variance in terms of new states entering the fray as being pure toss-ups. But the ones I'm going to be focusing on are more liberal states potentially becoming swing rather than conservative states becoming swing. But I will look at it from a liberal perspective of potential safe red states that they might try and be competitive in, although based off of the 2024 landscape, it was very positive for Republicans. So there's a much higher chance Republicans can go on a more offensive route for 2028 in some more liberal areas because the margins were far closer than we expected than the opposite, to where you got Democrats maybe going into like Ohio or Florida trying to make those states competitive. The potential of it is just limited because of the ridiculous margins. Would it really make much sense for Democrats to spend a ton of money in a state like Florida if they just lost it by double digits? Probably not. And so I'm going to analyze that as well. But when it comes to right now, you can see the seven major swing states. I think they're probably going to stay as pure swing states. Nevada was won by Trump, I believe, by like 3.5. Here it's rounded up to a 4-point victory. Maybe it was like a 3.6 point win. Arizona was around a 5.5 point victory. They've got it at 5. Arizona is a swing state where you might be able to argue, depending on the polling in 2027, 2028, that maybe it's a slight Republican lean because of the slightly exaggerated margin that we see. I still think Nevada, even though it was 3.5 to a 4-point victory, it's a pure swing state. Arizona is the one swing state to where maybe with its 11 electoral votes, you could say it's swinging more conservative, at least at the national level during general elections. So we'll have to see with that. Georgia, pure swing state. You could argue liberals are very bullish on that state because of the migration, the black migration, the liberal migration into the suburbs surrounding Atlanta. Trump won it by 2 points. He lost it in 2020. He won it in 2016. And then you do have Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt area, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin was less than a point, and that's a very favorable Trump environment. So to win Wisconsin by less than a point, you do have Michigan a little bit over a point, and then Pennsylvania by around 1.5 points. I know there is a narrative going around, maybe based on the positive voter registration, Republicans inevitably look like they're going to flip the voter registration in Pennsylvania. Maybe there's a chance to where Pennsylvania becomes the next Ohio. Just the history on Ohio. Back in 2016, many people thought Hillary Clinton was going to win Ohio. Previously, based on the historical data, Ohio had always decided the election. That's how pure of a swing state it was. Whichever way Ohio went was kind of the victor in terms of the election. And Trump won Ohio, shockingly, in 2016 by 8 points. It was one of the most surprising margins of the 2016 cycle. In 2020, the election that Biden won, Trump won Ohio by, again, around 8 points. So he didn't lose any voters in terms of margin. And then in 2024, he wins it by 11. So the Republican, and I guess it's just Trump because he's been the nominee the last 3 cycles for the Republicans, he wins it by 8 in 2016, 8 in 2020, 11 in 2024. This would be a state, if you're talking about a darker red state that liberals try and flip, this is probably one of the states that they would say, it's not going to happen. And honestly, they didn't even fight for it in 2024 because they knew there was no chance. So even with someone like Vance, or throw any Republican in there, it would be very surprising if Ohio was a competitive swing state again in 2028. If they want to turn Ohio, the earliest I would say would be 2032 or 2036. 2028 is just too soon for a state that's had the margin that it's had the last 3 cycles. So I think Ohio is a safe Republican state, and I really don't think even that would be one of the states to where if it's not a swing state, they can make it a swing state because Ohio previously was a swing state. I don't think it's going to happen. You do have Florida as another state in which Democrats were trying to be competitive in. 2016, it was a pure swing state. 2020, it was a pure swing state. what happened with DeSantis and the exaggerated margin. He won the governorship in a re-election in 2022 by like 19 points. And then liberals said, well, we didn't even try in that. We're going to try in the general election. There was some talk about should they allocate funds for Florida or not. Trump wins Florida, massive 30 electoral votes by 13 points. Think about what that does to the electoral math now that Florida is taken off the board and Ohio is taken off the board, going from swing states to Republican states. I don't see Florida being competitive in 2028. It swung too far. There was a lot of Republican conservative migration to Florida because DeSantis opened it up. And just DeSantis as a governor won over a lot of independent people in Florida, point blank period, to make that state conservative. The state was probably already trending that way anyways. He very narrowly won the governorship in 2018 and then easily won the re-election. And we'll see where they go in 2026 with the governor's race, maybe Casey DeSantis versus Byron Donalds. But Florida, I cannot see becoming a swing state in 2028. It's far too early. It was only a 3-point victory for Trump in 2016 and 2020, but the exaggerated margin, the 13-point victory, the context of Florida being open, kind of Florida versus California, if you guys remember, Newsom versus DeSantis, Florida was open during the pandemic, California was closed, and DeSantis has great approval, and there's a lot more Republicans. Now, the voter registration in Florida is amazing for Republicans versus where it was back in 2020 when it was still a very competitive state. So I can't see Florida swinging back. You never know. But at this point, I think for 2028, it would be deemed as a safer conservative state. Those would really be the only two. I mean, you could say maybe there's some movement in Utah, but it's not even close to being a swing state. Liberals always talk about Kansas, still a 16-point victory for Trump. I just can't see a liberal... a Republican, a pure red state that liberals could try and make swing for 2028. I really can't see one. So my guess is they probably really focus on Georgia and North Carolina as well. I guess they don't have North Carolina bolded in as a swing state. Yeah, North Carolina is another very important swing state. But the point is, what are 3 states that could be new swing states? I think the first one, it's going to be pretty boring, but it's going to have to be New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire was won by Kamala Harris by around 3 points. You can take a look at New Hampshire. The history of it, the recent history, is actually less than 3 points. You take a look at it, it's around 2.8 points in 2020. That would have been Biden who won it by about 7 points. In 2016, Hillary won it by 0.3 points. So similar with like Minnesota. If you guys remember in 2016, Minnesota was very close. 2012, Obama won it by around 6 points. So these are close results. Now, the thing I will say about New Hampshire, it's only 4 electoral votes. So people aren't going to care a ton about it, but it is setting up. And you look at the voter registration, there are more Democrats than Republicans by far, but most, even more than both Democrats and Republicans, most people are registered independents in New Hampshire. With potentially Vance, I could see him doing better than Trump in New Hampshire based off of his political profile, possibly better with more educated people, and that would help him in New Hampshire. So I could see Vance or a Republican potentially picking off New Hampshire, but it is only 4 electoral votes. But in terms of a state in which we talked about New Hampshire leading up to the 2024 election, but not a ton. People were saying maybe it's a swing state, maybe it's not. I could see a scenario to where it becomes maybe a more pure swing state, although I do think it will still slightly be, unless, a bunch of polling says otherwise. Maybe if there's like 10 straight polls that are plus, Vance +5 or Vance +4, then you could change it. But I would say New Hampshire, people are going to go into 2028 as a light blue state with the potential for it to be a swing state. It's one that you could see, but again, it is only 4 electoral votes, so you would have to caution on that. Now, taking a look at the next potential swing state, this is the one everyone is talking about. It is New Jersey. So New Jersey was a Harris +6 victory, a very surprising result. New Jersey does have the 14 electoral votes, so it is super impactful. You can see the recent results, 2024. Honestly, it's +5.9 for Harris. Going back to 2020, it was Biden +16. So you go from a +16 to around a +6. That's a 10-point shift in one cycle. Going back to 2016, it was Hillary around +14. You had Obama winning it by 18. So the last 4 or 5 election cycles, it has been a consistent Democrat +14, +15 until this recent 2024 cycle, which collapsed the margin within 6. And so that's why people are saying, well, what's going on with New Jersey? There is positive Republican voter registration. There is a lot of boots on the ground activity in New Jersey for Republicans. Will it end up being enough? Going from a +16 to a +6, you think, well, if they could replicate that, they would take the state. I think we could go into 2028 with New Jersey as I just can't see it as a swing state. I understand going from plus 16 to plus 6 is very good. I do think liberals are going to have to allocate funds for New Jersey, but I still think it would be deemed more as a kind of as a lighter blue or maybe a moderate blue state going into 2028, just because of the prior history before 2024. And we have to remember 2024 is an extremely positive conservative environment. Maybe that maintains through 2028. You never know. But in an extremely positive conservative environment where there was no liberal money spent in the state defending it, Trump got to within 6. And that's like the perfect environment now. And it's good. You want liberals to spend money in New Jersey and to waste money defending it. You want to kind of expand the map. Maybe you can make it a pure swing state and they're forced to spend a bunch of money and they're forced to do rallies in New Jersey. It would be favorable if that happened, but I would say right now, you look at New Jersey, maybe it's possible, but just based off of the current landscape and how polarized the country is, finding new swing states it's challenging. It is challenging. And then for the final swing state that, state that could become a swing state, to me, I'm looking at either New Mexico or Minnesota. Now, Minnesota, based off of results, you could say, well, it was a 1-point Hillary victory in 2016, but I would say probably New Mexico over Minnesota in terms of a state that could be a swing state. You look at New Mexico, back in 2020, Biden won it by around 9. The recent election, Harris won it by exactly 6. Previous elections in 2016, Hillary won it by 8. And I mean, listen, so there is positive momentum for Republicans in New Mexico, but it's really like flip a coin, New Mexico versus Minnesota, when you're talking about that third state. And the reason these are all liberal states becoming swing states is because, I mean, I don't know how you argue Ohio, which was an 11-point margin and previously an 8-point margin back-to-back cycles. How could you argue Ohio is going to be a swing state in 2028? How could you argue Texas is going to be a swing state in 2028? How could you argue Florida is going to be a swing state in 2028? It's just that, these states are within 6 or 7-point margins, so you could see a scenario to where they do become pure swing states, like a New Jersey, like a New Mexico. New Hampshire was only a 4-point Harris victory. So these are all states that are a little bit outside of the very close, 2 to 3 point margin, but all these liberal states, and it was a very positive Republican, year in 2024. So it's not surprising that these margins are, within liberal states. You can see Minnesota. I mean, that is a Somalian flag. What a terrible thing that is. They changed that flag, but you've got Minnesota with its 10 electoral votes. You did have 2016, a 2-point Hillary Clinton victory. 2020, Biden expanded it to a 7-point victory. 2024, it was back down to 4. So Minnesota potentially could be, you might have a chance. Although, I don't know, with the migration going into Minnesota, the amount of immigrants they're getting, especially around Minneapolis, I mean, I hear it's very, very bad. Maybe the people, outside of the Minneapolis area will band together and vote more conservative. It's only a 4-point difference. There's certainly got to be a chance for it. But to me, when you're talking about states that are not currently swing states but could become swing states in 2028, I think you have to look at New Hampshire. You could maybe even argue New Hampshire, based off of the independent voter registration, is already a swing state. But I mean, look, the Democrats have won it, in many straight elections, so it's hard to fully say that. But it was only a 4-point victory for Harris. I guess a little bit less than a 4-point victory, maybe around a 3.5-point victory. But it would be New Hampshire, it would be potentially New Jersey, and then it would be Minnesota or New Mexico. Those would be the states. I can't really see any other state, Republican or Democrat. I mean, the Democrats would say, well, what about Texas? I mean, that's a 14-point victory. And they were trying to swing Texas going back to 2016 when they said Hillary would win it or be competitive. And they were more competitive. It was within 10. It was like within 7. But just a crazy, exaggerated margin for Republicans. I just can't see Texas, because liberals would say Texas, Florida, Ohio, I would imagine. And then they might say, well, what about Kansas? What about Utah? There's some positive movement in those states. But it's just, for 2028, there's no way it happens that quickly. So in terms of states that are not, maybe they would say South Carolina as well, but it wouldn't happen either. In terms of states that are not swing states, that could become swing states, they're all liberal states. I would say New Hampshire is probably going to be one that gets talked about, but because it's only 4 electoral votes, it's got a limited impact on the overall election. And then I would also say New Jersey, and then maybe throw in Minnesota and New Mexico. You could argue between those two. But New Jersey would be the most impactful in terms of electoral votes at 14. You've got Minnesota at around 10. But I mean, Republicans have talked about winning Minnesota before. It hasn't happened. I still think Minnesota is a liberal state. And then maybe you throw in a state like Illinois. Would Illinois end up being an 11-point margin? Yeah, Illinois is an unfortunate case. I don't know if there were a bunch of late mail-in dumps or the way they counted was interesting on election night, because we had gotten to like 80 or 90% in, and Illinois was within like 7 or 8 points, and I was like, wow. Then they expanded it pretty rapidly to 11. Still a better margin than we saw, significantly better margin than we saw for Republicans in 2020 or 2016. New York was only a 12-point Harris victory, but New York's another one. I think with New York City, it's just out of reach. The population is just too high for Republicans to truly swing it. Maybe in a crazy scenario where Mondani wins and it's a disaster, New York gets significantly closer, but New York State, it's just, a lot of the areas are conservative, but New York City with the population density is certainly not conservative. So, I mean, you got to remember, New York, that's a very good Republican environment, and they lost by 12 in New York. Now, again, maybe it's starting to shift. Maybe it's a sign of things to come, or maybe it was just a great Republican environment. Either way, I would say you're looking at New Hampshire, New Jersey. Those are states that I think people are going to be talking about, especially New Jersey, and we've already seen it. And then maybe a Minnesota and New Mexico, but those are more Republicans got to prove they can win there, because they haven't at all recently. So you would still say those are probably liberal states. Where we're at right now, as a country, I don't think we're going to see states, sprout up left and right and be, I mean, we have seen in the past. I mean, Ohio just 2 election cycles ago was a pure swing state. Florida was a pure swing state, and those states have shifted. Maybe Pennsylvania is next. Maybe Arizona is next to shift to the right. I mean, through election cycles, if Republicans are able to conquer these states, just like they've done with Ohio and Florida, the math just gets easier and easier and easier. And the only state in terms of the swing states to where I see it really going in a negative direction would be a Georgia. Every other swing state looks either even or more positive for Republicans. Nevada, to me, is still a pure swing state, but you win it by 3.5 to 4 points. You'd have to say that's pretty positive. Arizona is certainly positive. Pennsylvania is certainly positive based on voter registration, based on, it was the largest margin out of any of the Rust Belt states. To me, Wisconsin and Michigan, those are all going to be close. And the other thing with Vance, if it is Vance, I do think Vance is going to be especially if it's Vance versus Newsom, and maybe it won't be Newsom, it's so early, but everyone's saying that Vance is going to have a significant advantage in the Rust Belt. And Newsom's going to pick Whitmer or someone that can try and relate, but Vance is going to be a Rust Belt candidate. And with the voter registration in Pennsylvania, they're going to pass liberals in terms of voter registration, probably by 2026 or 2027 at the latest. You win the Rust Belt with Florida and Ohio already locked down, and you're in a great position in Arizona. Vance can do worse than Trump and be fine. You don't need 300 electoral votes from Vance. Everyone's talking about, well, the incumbents are not doing well nowadays worldwide. Vance doesn't have to get to 312. Vance is going to be a Rust Belt candidate. And if it's Vance against Newsom, the contrast within the Rust Belt is so insane. It's going to be very challenging for Newsom. That's what I would, unless there's something, that something terrible happens to the Trump administration and they do a horrible job. But if it's this subjective Vance versus Newsom, right versus left, and Trump has an approval rating of 45 or 46%, he'll be, Vance should be fine. And he's a Rust Belt candidate. And he also could pick off a New Hampshire and take those 4 electoral votes as well. And you don't need Georgia at that point at all. You wouldn't even need North Carolina. You get the Rust Belt, you get Arizona, and you keep Ohio and Florida. That's why Ohio and Florida are so important in terms of the math and just screwing liberals, because they always had the math. They always had 100 different paths. Because Ohio and Florida are conservative states now, it's getting very challenging. Imagine Pennsylvania became the next Ohio. I don't think it's going to happen because of the population of Philadelphia, but I mean, that would be insane. So people have to understand, Vance does not have to do as well as Trump. People think, well, the Republicans are going to struggle in the midterms. Vance is not going to. It's Vance against Newsom in the Rust Belts. I don't think that's going to go very well. I mean, it's very early, but I'm just saying. So my guess is the 7 swing states probably remain. But if we get polling out of Arizona to where the composite is Vance +5 or +6, I think you could assume it's a pretty safe Republican state based off of the context we have with the 2024 Trump victory of 5.5 to 6 points. Or what was it? Was it 5.5 points? It was over 5 I think. But every other state, Georgia, North Carolina, they're going to be swing states. I can't see them changing much for 2028. And then the Rust Belt's all going to be swing. But again, the contrast between Newsom and Vance, with Vance and his background and his history versus Newsom, that's a phenomenal, that's fantastic for Republicans already with Ohio and Florida. And then you take the Rust Belt, well, and you're significant favorites in Arizona. You know, you lose Nevada, Georgia, it's fine, it doesn't matter. So, but this video, I would say overall, you know, 3 states that could become swing states. New Jersey, we'll see. It's very early. They've got the governorship race. I think the liberals are going to win that. They're going to try and swing it like, oh, New Jersey is back to being this Democrat stronghold. Yeah, I don't know about that. We'll see. But New Jersey could be a swing state. New Hampshire, I think, probably already is a swing state or a very light blue state. And then you would look at a Minnesota or a New Hampshire. And I can't see a Republican state that liberals are going to turn into a swing state. The only states they can argue they lost by double digits in 2024. So I mean, good luck. I guess good luck. I guess you could take the one congressional district in Maine, but Republicans might gerrymander the one out of Nebraska. So that might be another shutdown in terms of that electoral situation. Really, what they should do is make Nebraska and Maine winner take all, and it would be a net positive for Republicans because there's a significantly higher chance Republicans win Maine at large than Democrats win Nebraska at large, but they probably wouldn't win Maine. What was the margin? 7 points in Maine. Yeah, both of those states should be a winner take all. That's how I view that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you like the video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.